I hope everyone's doing well out there. I know it's an interesting time, so I appreciate you guys taking some time from your day to join us and learn a little bit more about this exciting new integration. My name is Kevin Dunn. I'm the General Manager for TestProject here at Tricentis. We also have on the line Eldar Kravetsky. He is the CTO for TestProject. He was
Hi.
the one. Hey, Eldar, thank you for joining us today. Eldar is the one who built this awesome integration. So he'll be here to answer some technical questions towards the end. This is the agenda that we have today. We want to talk first about what TestProject is, why Tricentis acquired it, and then we're going to talk a bit about how the integration works. For this part, I'm going to be jumping back and forth between the slides and the live application. So we'll hope that everything works smoothly there. We don't have any technical hiccups, fingers crossed. Finally, we'll talk about some best practices. There's a lot of different options you have when you're using qTest with TestProject as far as test scheduling, orchestration, etc. So I'll point out some different options that you have there, and then we'll have a Q&A as well at the end. So feel free to ask questions along the way. There's a Q&A panel that I see many of you guys have found already. So as questions come up, just go ahead and ask those. We'll sort of keep a list of those, and then we'll answer them at the end, just so that we can have those answers in the recording. We will be recording the webinar today as well. So if you miss anything or we're moving too fast, you'll get a recording and you can definitely watch that back later. So let's talk about whether or not you're in the right place today and whether or not working with TestProject is a good idea for you. Obviously, there are a number of different automation solutions out on the market. A number of you have tried TestProject already, but we find that the best fit customers typically are testing web, mobile applications, or APIs. We do not cover with TestProject yet testing desktop applications, but we do have other products from Tricentis like Tosca that can do that. But you're certainly going to enjoy TestProject if you're using open source tools today, especially things like Selenium and Appium. You'll see that TestProject has a direct integration to those. We do definitely cater to technical audiences. You'll see that we can support writing tools or writing tests, sorry, with our scripted tools. We also support a non-technical approach using a scriptless recorder. So even if you don't know how to write code, you can enjoy and get a lot of benefit out of TestProject. We'll show you a little bit of how that works today. We do support all platforms. So if you're using a Mac or Windows or Linux, you'll be able to use TestProject's cloud platform from any browser, and you'll be able to also record tests on any of those platforms. This will be a 100% cloud-based testing solution. This is only offered in the cloud today, so you cannot deploy and host this on your own servers as you can with some other Tricentis products, so keep that in mind. This is a very much so best of breed friendly solution. You'll see our integration obviously with qTest today. We also have integration with other tools like Jenkins, we'll talk a little bit about, and other tools like Browser Stack and Sauce Labs. And then finally, this is a free solution. So if you're using qTest, this is going to be free for you, but even if you're not using qTest, TestProject will be a completely free solution for anyone to use, and it's sort of our thank you to the community for helping Tricentis to make us the leader in continuous testing and test automation. So this is our goal with TestProject. For those of you that are familiar, we acquired TestProject about 8 to 10 months ago, and the goal is to deliver a completely free community-focused platform to thank our users for making Tricentis the #1 in software testing. And we already have a question on that, so I'm happy to answer it. How can we make this product free? Well, the answer to that is we're very well funded. We're a scaled business today, you know, with many millions of dollars in revenue. So we do have plenty of funding to be able to put towards this. And the idea of it is obviously we do want to get something from this eventually. And what this is bringing to us for our investment in this free tool is, one, a lot of brand awareness from the community. People are becoming familiar with Tricentis by way of TestProject. And number two, as we mentioned on the previous slide, there are some things that TestProject is not yet able to do, like say testing desktop applications. Those types of instances will provide us the ability to potentially have TestProject users add on other Tricentis products. We are talking about the qTest integration today, so that's a great example of how a free product that Tricentis offers, which is TestProject, would integrate to a paid product that we offer, which would be qTest. So good question from the audience there. So TestProject is a pretty mature tool. So I said we acquired it about 8 to 10 months ago. It's been in development since 2015, so almost 5 years now that Eldar and the team have been working on it. The team is growing quite rapidly. So since we acquired the product, we've actually doubled the size of the team, which is mostly developers based in Israel. And we have plans to even grow the team further. It is a solution that is free and built on top of Selenium and Appium, so it specifically targets web and mobile apps and also has support for testing web services APIs. And it's 100% based in the cloud, which allows you to work on Windows, Mac, and Linux desktops or laptops that you might be working with. And we offer a coded and codeless approach, and that allows you to actually build your own reusable add-ons, which we market through community marketplace. So that's a big differentiator for us, is the ability to kind of build add-on components, share those with the other users in the community so that they can take advantage of the customizations and work that you've done. So as we talk about the integration today, those of you that haven't used qTest or TestProject before, we'll talk a little bit about the nomenclature and kind of how the data flows between the two tools. qTest is a test management tool, right? So you could think of this as sort of a replacement to legacy tools like HP Quality Center, HP ALM. It is going to be able to manage not only your automated testing, but also your manual testing. So this is being used by many customers today as kind of their holistic testing platform. On the right here, as I just move my question box out of the way, we have TestProject. TestProject, similar data structure you'll see, but TestProject is only supporting automated testing. So the number of objects is usually going to be smaller. TestProject would be in an organization using both of these tools. TestProject would be a tool with, let's say, all of the automated results in it, but you would want to integrate to qTest to have it combined with all of the manual testing results if you have any of those. Plus, you might have results from other automated tools you might be using, let's say Tosca or other automated tools, maybe not from Tricentis. And so qTest would become the central repository for all of those results. So introducing this integration is a way to have TestProject results and assets be synchronized over into qTest, as you see in this diagram here. So let's talk from the start here. So you'll see back on our previous slide, the first step is going to be you actually need to be able to log in. So what does this mean? This means that we want to use qTest as sort of the system of record for login and allow you to perform a single sign-on to get into TestProject. And if you don't have a TestProject account, we'll actually automatically create a TestProject account for you based on your email that you're using in qTest, and we'll actually link these two accounts together. So let me see now. I'm going to try to switch out into my browser here. So you'll see, are you guys still able to see my screen? Yes, okay. So this is my qTest instance here that I've created. If you don't have an account for qTest, you can do that by just visiting tricentis.com and going to our free trial section. You can download a free 14-day trial of qTest. Again, qTest is a paid product. TestProject is a free product. And you'll see in your instance of qTest, you're going to have a number of different things. One of them is this 9 box. This is what we call it here. There's actually only 8 items in it today, now that we've added TestProject. But you'll see that what this is it's essentially like a Google Apps interface. So it sort of connects all of these various modules and applications around qTest together. And what it's going to allow you to do is when you click on this icon here, it's actually going to bring you out into TestProject. And if you already have an account, it's going to log you directly into that account using the same email address that you're using in qTest. And if you don't have an account existing, what's going to happen that we're actually going to check the database. If your email doesn't exist there, we can't log you in from qTest, then we're going to take you through the flow of creating a new account. That is going to require you to confirm your email address and also to accept the free license terms and conditions of TestProject, since TestProject is licensed separately from qTest. So that's sort of how that works. Some other notes that I wanted to make here on this. One, we just talked about, you need to accept the EULA and confirm your email address. This is a sort of separate process for licensing from qTest, so that's why that's required. Number 2 is that if you share your qTest instance with multiple other users, which is kind of a common use case, most people are acquiring a qTest license to support a large group of users, then all of your qTest users will be added into the same qTest site. So sort of be a one-to-one mapping of qTest site or qTest domain to a site or domain or instance of TestProject. And this is good because then we kind of align everything you'll see from there, the projects, the results, and whatnot, to mirror what you have in qTest. So that's the first thing. And then once you've done that, what you're going to see now, and again, I'm going to hop back into my browser, is that you will have an automatically configured integration with qTest when you go into TestProject. So now if you go into TestProject, you come to the integrations area, you go down to qTest here, you'll see that this integration is turned on. Further, you can see you can edit this integration. So if for any reason in the future you needed to connect to a different domain of qTest, you can change the domain of qTest that this TestProject site is integrated to. You can update your bearer token, which is sort of your API authorization token if needed. And also you can turn off this integration. So if at any point you were starting to see issues, or you just didn't want to see the TestProject results in qTest anymore for some reason, simply turn this off here, and that would stop that integration between the two tools for the moment. And just a note here, you don't ever really need to use this section of TestProject. You're going to automatically get this integration configured as soon as you log in from qTest to TestProject in the 9 box. So you would really only use this tab here to change the integration settings should something not be working, or should you want to stop the integration altogether. All right, next step here. So we do integrate the project hierarchy between the two tools. The flow, to go back to this slide here, you'll see this is sort of the one element of data that actually flows from qTest into TestProject, is the structure of the projects. From there, everything else is actually going to flow in the other direction from TestProject back into qTest. The reason for this is that we mentioned qTest is kind of the system of record. So the whole hierarchy for the organization around their test reporting and whatnot would come from the qTest project hierarchy usually. So that's why TestProject will inherit all of the projects in the hierarchy here. And then it will be sending back results when you create tests and whatnot within these inherited projects. Those results will come back into the original qTest project hierarchy. So I know that might be a bit confusing here. Why don't I just go ahead and show you this here to make that easier. So you'll see when you go into qTest, you will have essentially a section underneath your name called administration. And when you come into that section, you'll have the project list. And then in the project list here, this is where you can add a new project. You can also give these projects a description. And once you create this project in qTest, you'll see that it will show up here on the home page of TestProject, where you see the listing of all of our projects. So you'll see that there's actually 3 projects in TestProject. There's 2 projects in qTest. So these 2 qTest projects have been automatically created in TestProject based on the integration. There's actually a 3rd separate project called My First Project here, which is a directly created project in TestProject and will not get synchronized back into qTest. So that's worth noting. You can, and you might for many reasons, create a project in TestProject that you don't want to live in qTest. And so we won't actually sync back those projects from TestProject to qTest. They'll only get synced in the direction from qTest to TestProject. So that's how that works. And then if you want to continue on with the integration, you need to be aware that it's based on the project in which that data is created. So for example, if I want a TestProject test case to get synchronized back into qTest, I need to make sure that I do it in one of these projects here, like this one, for example, that's integrated with qTest, because if I do it in a different project, like this one here, there's no equivalent project here in qTest for this data to be pushed back into. Let's see if I had any other notes here. Yep, so all qTest projects at the moment come into TestProject. We showed that. If you create a project in TestProject specifically, it will not sync back into qTest, and that you need to create the data in TestProject in an integrated project for it to flow back into qTest. All right, another quick gotcha here to be aware of. There's a section in every qTest project called automation settings. It is controlled at the project level, so you can't just turn this on for your qTest site as a whole. You need to turn it on for each individual project. And basically what it is just something that turns on the APIs that accept automated test results from various different tools like TestProject, Jenkins, etc. So make sure that for any project that you're creating, if you're creating some new projects to test out this integration, make sure that you turn those automation settings on. And also make sure that you don't mess around too much with the mapping here. You can obviously edit these if you want to change the values that TestProject sends to mapping to different, maybe customized values that you have in qTest. But make sure you don't delete any of these entirely, because if we don't have a mapping for pass, fail, or skip, the 3 main statuses that TestProject is using with the integration, then you might start losing some test results coming back from TestProject into qTest. So I'll show you here where we can do this. Let me exit out here of the presentation. If we come into any project in qTest here and you go into the settings, you'll see there's automation settings here. And when we get into the automation settings, then we'll have this first section here around automation integration. This is the one you're going to want to care about specifically to the TestProject integration. And you'll see here we've automatically mapped your 3 required statuses. These are the ones that TestProject is using. That's pass, fail, and skip. And we've mapped those automatically to the closest qTest status when you turn this integration on. You can change this though, and if you customize your status list in qTest, you might have many more statuses. You might want to change how these map here. You might want to add additional mappings, but make sure you at minimum have a mapping to each of these 3 statuses here, and you have this turned on and you save this. If you don't save this, sometimes this turning on of the status will not take. So that's a good thing to know. If you, for any reason, are not seeing tests or test results pass into qTest, typically that will be the reason why that is not working. Now, let's talk a little bit here about the first set of data, which is getting passed between the tools, and that's going to be the folders and the test cases. So you can see here now we're starting to talk about test project data flowing into qTest. And basically, we're going to be bringing over all of the folders that you create in test project. We're going to be creating those as modules in qTest, and we're going to be putting the description of any of those folders in the modules in qTest. So that's going to happen automatically. Now, it will all get created. You might not be able to see here, but you'll see in a second, in a folder called TestProject. Then all of the TestProject folders will get created under that in the qTest test design tree. You can, from that point forward, move things around. So if you want to move these test folders into other areas of the hierarchy, you're able to do that without risking breaking the integration. However, if you delete the modules entirely, so you're not just moving the folders or the modules of tests that are created here, but you actually delete them, they may reappear in future resynchronizations. So we'll keep automatically any moving around of folders, that's fine. If you delete folders, it's likely that they're going to be recreated when the next sync from TestProject to qTest happens. Now, in those folders, you're going to have the actual test cases. So these are automated test cases that live in TestProject that are within this folder. They're going to get created here in the test design area as automated test cases. You'll see you're going to get the name of the test. You'll get the description of the test, which is going to have things like the URL that's being tested, if it's a web app, parameters, etc. And then down below, you'll actually have the description of the steps. So there's going to be the detailed description of what's being tested in each step, as well as the expected result. So if you are doing anything like, for example, inverting the status, saying that you expect for a step to fail, that should show up in these test step descriptions down here. And as you update the test in TestProject, we're going to use TestProject's versioning here to essentially create a new version of that test case, but we'll keep it within the same test case object in the test design area. And if you make any updates here in qTest, because these are going to be editable objects, you know, for example, if you went in and changed which URL we navigate to in qTest, those updates are not going to be pushed back into TestProject. If you want to update a TestProject test case, you should always do that directly in TestProject itself. So let's take a look at that here in the browser. So here in TestProject, we've created a folder, and you can do that easily here by clicking this new folder button, and that's going to create a new folder for you with a name and a description. This folder is just called test folder, and inside of it we have here a test that we've created in TestProject. So this is called test number 1. You see we've created that, and when we go into qTest, you'll see in the test design area within the same project that we were working in TestProject, we should have, first of all, an automatically created folder called TestProject. And then we'll have the module here, the folder that was created to match the one here. So we've created this folder called test folder there. And then we've got test number 1 within that folder. You'll see we've not only brought over the name, but we've created it as a type of automation. We've also here put in a description, which includes the URL that's getting tested for this particular test. And then down below here, you'll see we have the test steps. This includes both what happens in the step, as well as, you know, are there screenshots being captured for this step? When are they being captured? What's the timeout, etc. And what the expected result is here. For most of these steps, it's just going to be a typical pass, but we would also allow you to put in an inverted result here, which would be if you expected a particular step to fail. So that will all be here. You'll see the history will capture the versions. So every time we save any changes to a test here in TestProject, it's going to create a brand new version automatically, baseline version here that will have those updates and results, so I can see actually the change content coming from TestProject by way of this integration. And should you make any changes here, again, this is not going to flow back to TestProject. So if we want to change, something about what's going on in one of these steps here, we would want to do that by going into TestProject itself and editing this test in the editor. So that is the test case integration there. Let me just check our questions and see if there's anything I should tend to right now. Okay, now let's talk about test results. So test results are going to be passed again from TestProject into qTest. So what we're going to sync here is the name of the execution, which is basically the test run. We're going to also bring over the description of the test execution, which is going to include a link to the TestProject report to see those results in detail, and then the step level results. So this is going to show what actually happened for each of the steps there. We're not going to bring over at the moment screenshots. So if you're capturing screenshots, you'll be able to see those in the linked report here in the description of the test run. And also, we're going to be using the best practice in qTest results storage, which is the use of test logs. So we're not going to be creating a new test run every time we execute this job from TestProject. Instead, we're going to be updating this test run by adding a new log to it, which I'll show you in a second. Additionally, we're going to be creating the level up of hierarchy there, which is going to be the job. So job is kind of like a test suite in TestProject. They will correlate to the test cycles actually in qTest, and then there'll be a level below that, which is what TestProject would call browser. qTest will call this a test suite, and so you'll see that the browser will be listed here as the name of the test suite, and then the test run will be below that. Reason for this is so that we can easily organize and differentiate the results of each test that's run against a different browser, or also different mobile devices as well will be set up as separate suites in qTest. So I know this can be a bit confusing, so let me just show it, and I think it will be easier to explain. So I'll switch over here. So you see we created a job. Job is basically just a set of tests that we want to execute. And so this is where you can actually set up jobs of tests to be executed directly in TestProject, and they can also be scheduled as well. So if you're looking for an easy way to schedule tests, obviously qTest has its launch capability, but you could just set up a set of executions to happen directly from TestProject as well. And once we go ahead and we either run this set of tests directly and execute the job, or we set the job up to be scheduled, then the results are going to flow into qTest, and they're going to look like this here. So you'll see that we have two areas here. One is we have an area where you'll see you can perform jobless executions. That's where you come into qTest and you just say that you want to run a test directly as sort of a one-off test. So all of those results will get captured in that cycle there. More typically, what customers would be doing is setting up a job, which is this thing here called demo web test. They'd be putting any number of TestProject tests into that and executing it. And then you'll see we organize the results in qTest here based on the browser that was executed against in this case, or it could also be the mobile device. So here you'll see we executed against Chrome as well as Chrome headless. And so same test, just two different browsers, and we can investigate the results of both. So here we can come in and look at the Chrome result first, and you'll see that there's only been one execution of this, so one test log. But if we ran this subsequently, if I execute this again, it's going to add a second log and update the status accordingly here. And then you'll see we have information about the exact type of browser that was executed against, and we also have a link to this report. So if you wanted to do some further investigation of what happened with this test, you can simply click that link and it's going to take you out into TestProject report for that particular test. So here we can look at just that one test execution. I can look at it on Chrome versus on headless Chrome. For example, I can see the steps down here. I can filter which steps failed. And then I can also look at a test report for the job as a whole, as well as for this project and test project as a whole across various different time ranges here. So you can both use qTest reports as well as for deep dives. We would probably recommend TestProject report to get into some of the nitty gritty, as well as see potentially some of the screenshots of some of your steps in the case that they fail. So let me just check the questions here. All right. We talked about the reporting. Last thing here, there was a question about this. Oops, I clicked the wrong button there. There was a question about this in terms of how can we schedule and run tests in TestProject. There's really 3 ways you can do it. One is that you can use the out-of-the-box scheduling, which I just showed you. That's pretty simple and basically straightforward. You'll go to the actual job in TestProject. So we would just go here, and like I was showing you, you would just say, I want to set up a schedule for this. And you can say, let's run this, tomorrow, or let's run this, every day at a certain time, every week at a certain time, whatever it might be. So this would be kind of our recommended approach. If you're not using a CICD tool, we think the easiest way to run a schedule of tests would be to do it directly through our scheduling here. You don't need to install anything else. It's all orchestrated through the cloud, and we'll just talk to your agents and run the tests when the time comes to do that. However, there are other options. Another pretty popular option is using a CI/CD tool. If you use Jenkins, then you'll be all set. We actually have a Jenkins plugin for TestProject here, which you can download. And if you download this, it'll essentially sit in your Jenkins instance. It'll allow you to pick any job from TestProject and run that job every time a CI/CD process happens. So that would be the easiest way. If you're using Jenkins, use this plugin. If you're not using Jenkins, then you might want to integrate your CI/CD server to TestProject using TestProject's API. So if you go to api.testproject.io, you'll see that we have a very detailed REST API, which has been implemented with Swagger. And you'll see here there's one specific set of APIs down here for jobs, which are those test suites. And we have the ability to run a job directly from some of these APIs here, like this one. So we would just recommend saying, if you don't use Jenkins, but you use a CI/CD tool from your command line interface for that CI/CD tool, you can easily add, a shell script or, PowerShell script or something like that to go ahead and call our API to kick off that test. And then the final option is if you're using qTest Launch, which we know many qTest customers are, you could call the TestProject API by using a universal agent. Same API, we would just call it from a universal agent rather than a CI/CD tool. The only downside of that, I would say, is that you're really installing an agent just for calling that API, right? Because TestProject's a cloud-based tool, you're creating another server with another set of software installed on it and managing that just to really pass over the instructions to run the API. So I would think about potentially using one of these other 2 options. But again, the drawback of these options is a lot of customers want to have a single set of test schedules that they can look at, manage, and execute. And if you use qTest launch, that's probably what you're after. And using one of these other two tools would mean that, you know, you've got schedules in other places. So any of these three options will work, and the test results will still come back regardless of where the job is triggered from. So regardless of which of these options you use to actually kick off the execution of the test, you should still get the jobs flowing back as cycles and suites, and the executions flowing back as test runs and test logs. So that was it for the presentation part. I'm going to stop my screen share here. We have some Q&A, which I may need to ask Eldar some questions here. So Eldar, we had one question here. Is it possible to see the agent name of the agent that the job ran against captured anywhere in qTest currently?
Well, currently it's not there, but it's a good idea because we have a link that links to the detailed report in TestProject, and it has all the information there.
Right.
So basically, you can see agent details in TestProject, but we can definitely add it to the execution log in qTest. Not a problem.
Yeah. So you mean here when you look at this in particular, this report here?
Yeah,
with
it says
the agent, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So,
okay. Some other questions here. Is it possible to execute tests from qTest much like you would with selecting the schedule on the test case, which takes you into launch? So you can do that, as we just mentioned, but would require installing a launch agent and then configuring what we call a universal agent. That universal agent would need to, at this point, call our API to run a particular job using the job ID. We will consider in the future potentially having a pre-built agent for launch that would work directly with TestProject, but at the moment it's not there, so you would need to set up a universal agent to do that. As a qTest admin, how as a qTest admin do you administer users in TestProject? You don't need to do anything to administer the users. Basically, what they'll do is anyone who can log in to qTest will simply be able to click into TestProject in the 9 box here, and then clicking into TestProject, that will automatically create their user. If it doesn't already exist in TestProject, they'll be taken through the steps to confirm that they want the free license of TestProject and confirm their email and whatnot, but then they'll automatically be created as a user. And then I believe, Eldar, correct me if I'm wrong, you can still control the permissions of those users that are created through the integration, just like you would any other TestProject user in this area of the accounts, right?
That's correct. Yeah. If like there are other TestProject projects that you want to grant access to, you can do it from the account administrator of TestProject can grant access to specific projects, like other than the ones that got synced from qTest.
Great. So hopefully that answers that question. As far as this question, Eldar, I don't think we have this yet, but there's a question: if you have a qTest manual test and you want to then automate that test in TestProject and have that, you know, be reflected that now this manual test has become automation, we don't yet really have an integration to cover off on that at the moment, correct?
Correct. Currently, the data flow goes from TestProject to qTest, and it will create the tests automatically there, but will not link to existing manual tests. In this case, it just gets override, so we will have to think on that.
Yep. Yes. So not today, but what we would recommend best practice probably would be when you're done with your manual test case, you could export that into something like Excel, for example. And you could keep a record of that, but then you would probably want to delete that manual test case within qTest, and then automate the test case in TestProject. It will flow into the folder here in TestProject that you've created, and gets synced over into qTest. Let me just go to that. And then you could move it back to where the manual test was before. So as we mentioned, you don't have to keep the test in this structure to keep the integration alive. So once you've automated that test, if you wanted to move this into some other folder back where your manual test case used to live, you could do that, and the data would keep flowing normally between the two tools. Had a question about screenshots from TestProject getting attached to the test run in qTest. So we do not do that today. If you want to see the screenshots in TestProject, how you would access those is through the report here. So if you go into the actual test result, in the description here, you'll have a link. You would click that link to go to the report. And then if you do have screenshots, which in this case, all of my test steps passed, and I was only capturing screenshots in the case that there was a failure. So I wouldn't have any screenshots here anyways, but if they were here, you could view them in this report. We're considering bringing those into qTest in the future as well. Let's see here. There's a question about being an enterprise with multiple business units. qTest is structured with a single qTest project for all applications within a business. Is it possible to separate the automations created within TestProject like this and not restructure what we have in qTest to match TestProject? You would need to build, I guess, a similar folder structure is what we would recommend. So if you went into that project in TestProject, we would want to build out a similar folder structure here, where we would come in and build out, folders to match each of those business areas. And then those folders would get pushed back into the test design area here. And hopefully those would mirror closely what you have for the structure of other things in your business. So sort of align the automation results to look similar to how you have your existing tests in qTest today. But as Eldar mentioned, right now the flow of test folders and test cases and test results, it's flowing from TestProject into qTest at the moment. So there's no way to actually take the qTest folder structure and bring it into TestProject. The only thing that comes from qTest into TestProject would be the actual projects themselves. Question here about if TestProject will be on-premise anytime in the near future. As long as it's free, the answer to that question is likely not, just because of the extra support costs, deployment costs, etc., testing costs that come with deploying it on premise. But we are working on a number of features which will help along the lines of security with the SOC 2 certificate and certification that we're going after, as well as some other things like integration to local Git repositories, so you can actually store your test code locally without having to upload it into TestProject to run it. So we will be announcing many of those integrations later in the year. We're certainly doing a lot to focus on security, but definitely are looking to keep it in the cloud at the moment until we transition maybe into the future to having a paid option where you might be able to deploy TestProject on premise. Okay, if I already have TestProject tests before I have integrated to qTest, can I import them later and sync them? Eldar, that's a good question for you. How would that work?
Well, because when you create the integration in the first place, you get qTest projects created in TestProject and not the other way around. The simplest way to achieve that is that you need to decide which tests from TestProject you want to sync. And then you have a simple option in TestProject to say copy test to another project or maybe several tests, right? And once you do that, you just copy them to one of the synchronized projects, and they will automatically get synchronized after a while. So this is the way, I guess, to achieve that.
Cool. Good answer. Okay. Just looking at, we got a lot of questions here, which is good. Another one for you, Eldar, is a question about, is it possible to use a Docker image to add agents to TestProject? I know that was a recently released feature that you worked on a bit. Do you want to share anything about that?
Well, yeah, actually, this is like something totally new that we just released, and we will make like new version of it. And you can find TestProject Agent in Docker Hub already, right, with all the explanations how to run it. And so basically, you will have two options, or you can spin up many agents to like manage a virtual lab, or you can like bring up an agent for the sole purpose of execution, and then the agent will disappear after a single execution. So this is like two ways, and they're described. We will get out there like a more complete documentation pretty soon on the subject, but you can go to Docker Hub and already see the image itself.
Great. Yeah, we're very excited about that feature. So that's definitely going to be an exciting one. A lot of questions about using Tosca and TestProject together here, as well as the differences between those, or why someone would use one versus the other. We sort of talked about that a bit in the beginning, but really, a lot of the difference between TestProject and Tosca is that TestProject supports writing tests as code as well as a scriptless approach. It is, however, only limited to web, mobile, and APIs. Tosca can test a number of desktop applications, mainframe, things like that, which we do not yet support with TestProject. So there was a question as well about that. If we have any support for desktop tool automation, we do not have that currently. And one of the big differentiators, again, is going to be that this is a completely cloud-based solution. So as you saw, we open TestProject in a browser. We perform all of the recording of tests, both against web apps and mobile apps through that browser. And we can work, therefore, on Mac and Linux machines versus Tosca is completely a Windows-based tool today and works with a thick client. So slightly different deployment. And finally, the TestProject solution is free for anyone, and it's going to come with a free integration to qTest. Tosca is obviously a separately licensed tool that would come with its own cost to use it, that would be separate of qTest. So that's to answer some of those questions. Okay. Another question here, how does TestProject maintain traceability to requirements in qTest? So that's pretty straightforward. Basically, whenever you create this test from TestProject and qTest, you're going to see that there's a requirements area here. From here, you can add linkage to any requirements. In this particular project, I haven't created any yet, but I could link to any of my existing requirements here. That would add my traceability from this test case to the requirement. And then in that way, you will always maintain that traceability. So if this test later on is executed and failed, we'll have visibility back to those requirements that failed in qTest. And it's also worth noting, one of qTest's major features, if you haven't used it before, is that it has a very strong integration to agile tracking tools like Jira, Rally, and version 1. So you can also track back traceability to requirements and defects, not only in qTest, but in tools like Jira, for example, as well. Question here about storage limit on the free TestProject license. It's advertised that there's a limit of 2 gigabytes there, but we are making TestProject free for everyone. If you do run out of storage, we're happy to give you more. just give us a quick notification of that in the chat here in TestProject, and we can quickly add some credits, some more storage for you here. And we're happy to go above and beyond the 2 gigabytes. We just like to start there to make sure that people are aware and smart about the way that they're using the free storage, but we're happy to increase that if needed. Let's see here, we're getting close to the end of our questions. Question here about parallel test execution. It is possible to do parallel test execution in TestProject. The way that you do that is through using multiple agents. Each agent can only execute one set of tests at a time. You know, basically each of these would be one parallel thread, but you can create as many jobs as you'd like to, and the job is specific to a particular agent. So if I had an agent and let's say Eldar had an agent as well, and we wanted to run tests in parallel across those 2 agents, we would just create 2 jobs, and then we can either set both of the jobs to run at the same time through a schedule or through CICD, and that would achieve the goal of running multiple threads of tests in parallel so that you're not, you know, waiting on one single machine to execute all of your tests.
Yeah, Kevin, if I might just add something to that, basically, if you are using like CICD or some external tool, you know, proprietary or something like that, you can basically trigger a job. Kevin showed that before, like from our API. And one of the options is to provide agent ID, which will then override the configured agent only for that specific execution. So basically, besides the option that Kevin explained about right now, you can use a single job and just trigger it across multiple agents from the outside, if this is the way that you want to go, right? You will be able to see everything on our monitor while it's going on.
Got it.
Yeah.
Great. And couple of questions here on the agent. Want to follow up with you on Eldar. One question was, is it possible to run scripts in iOS simulators?
Well, we not officially support iOS simulators. So basically, like Android emulators, yes, but iOS is less. But we have integration with BrowserStack and Sauce Labs, which provide you the option. So basically, if you set up one of these integrations, you can run all of your TestProject tests there without problem.
Yep, and that's good. That's worth noting. You'll see in this cloud execution area, there's both these integrations here. Both of these companies provide free trials. So we would highly recommend, if you're looking to execute on a let's say iOS simulator or iOS real device, or you want to test across different types of browsers that you don't have readily available in-house, simply go ahead and sign up for a free trial of one of these tools, and then you can connect them here. There was also a question about if we had integration to Slack, which we do here with this Add to Slack button. You can integrate TestProject to Slack to send test results out after they're executed into particular Slack channels. A few other questions to clean up here. Does the agent run well on a VM? I think the answer to that is yes, right, Eldar?
Yeah, well, before we had the Docker option, many of our customers are already running in virtual machines, so no, not an issue there.
Yep. And then is there any limit to the number of teammates that can be invited with the free license of TestProject? The answer to that question is no. Can you install, so you can invite as many people as you want. Can you install multiple agents on one machine, Eldar? I think the answer to that is this limit of 1 agent per machine, correct?
Yeah, 1 agent per machine, but if you do run like Dockers or VMs on that machine, so basically one physical hardware can run several agents like in Docker containers. So this is an option. You don't have to have many computers for many agents, right?
For
In this
parallel
case.
execution.
Yeah.
Yep. We had a question about the SDK, specifically Python SDK. Yes, that is currently in development. So that should be here soon in the next few months. We've just started designing that out and are starting to work on that. We also have a JavaScript SDK coming soon as well. The 2 currently implemented SDKs, if you want to write scripts, using a coded approach, we've got Java and C#. And if you use these SDKs, very easy to take your existing Selenium or Appium scripts and simply use our SDK to make them compatible with TestProject, and then they can be uploaded in TestProject. You'll see that we offer the scriptless approach to record on mobile and web, but we can also just upload your code. So once you wrap your code with the SDK that TestProject provides, it'll be able to run in TestProject as well. Any native Selenium or Appium test in Java and C#, and then in the future, JavaScript and Python very shortly. So I think we're out of time. We answered most of the questions, but I'm going to take a second look here. And if we missed your question, I will follow back up over email. A lot of great support, so we appreciate you guys staying engaged. We did record this, so we will send out the recording to everyone here. So if you want to watch it back, please feel free to do that. And again, stay safe out there, and thank you for your time. And we'll hope to talk to you guys all again soon.